Hi, I'm Karin Hurt, and I'm here with our next edition of Asking for a Friend. Today, we're talking about executive presence. And I am here with Joel Garfinkle, who wrote this great, big, thick book based on research and really powerful and I love practical tools and techniques for building your executive presence. Joel, thank you so much. Welcome to the show.
Great for having me, Karin. I'm really excited to be here.
All right. So one of this is a question that we get a lot. So people say, hey, you know what? I just got my 360 review, or I just, there was a succession planning conversation, or I just finished my performance appraisal, and I got this nebulous feedback. You need more executive presence. And then I go back to my boss and they're like, I don't know what they meant, but just get some. And so I think that is some of the most frustrating feedback that people can get because it feels so vague. So I'm curious, if someone is listening and they have received that feedback, where would you recommend that they start?
One of the most challenging things with that is people often receive that feedback. They're so surprised by the feedback that they're getting that they end up putting themselves in a position where they don't even ask what executive presence is, or can you define that, or can you be more specific, or can you give me some examples? That they're just kind of like, okay, executive presence, and they leave and they go, well, what do I do with that? How do I get better at that? How do I respond to that? So I think what's helpful is having, in my book, the whole book is based on a 3x3 model, which is based on talking to over 1,400 executive coaching clients and 7,500 workshop participants. I narrowed it down to 9 specific competencies. And so I think what you want to do is take a model like this 3x3 model, the 9 competencies, and I can go over those in more detail, but to be able to share something that says, here is what I see as executive presence, help me take these 9 areas and tell me which ones I'm strong at, which ones am I weaker in, which ones do I need to get better at. That provides a model and a framework, which then allows the leader who's like, I know it when I see it, but I have a really hard time describing it. So let me be very vague about giving the feedback. Instead, they can look at the 9 competencies and say, oh, it's this one, and this one. You're like, great. Now give me some examples so I can know how to improve on that.
All right. So let's pick your top 3, your most favorite of these competencies, or the ones that you think are the biggest opportunity for a lot of the people that you coach.
Well, a few that come to mind is one is being vocal. A lot of times I work with people in the STEM fields, engineers, scientists, people with a very certain expertise. And they have a tendency to rely on their expertise so much so that they don't necessarily know how to be vocal and speak up and be forthcoming with their opinions. They kind of hold themselves back in meetings, and they have a tendency to be a little more shy or introverted and hesitant to be outspoken with their knowledge and with their expertise and what they know. And it's too bad, because it does the company a disservice. It does the individual. They're not as engaged. And so it's like learning how to be vocal, because when you're not vocal, then people don't know you. When they don't know you, then they don't really understand what your presence is, and they don't really feel you. They don't really feel your strength and your confidence and your power and your presence. And so being vocal in all the meetings you attend, speaking 2 to 3 times every single meeting you're attending, is a must, is a baseline. Because when you can speak to an expertise, to something you have knowledge about, to something that's going to add value, people then feel your presence, and then they feel like, oh, this leader knows what they're talking about. We need to hear from that person more. When you're quiet, timid, passive, you put yourself in a position where people don't know who you are, and you're not as engaged, and it undermines your presence that you're showing up with.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who is, maybe one of these people who's a little more introverted? And I'll even hear this from my husband and business partner, David. He'll say, when I get in a meeting with you and Jared, our producer for Asking for a Friend, sometimes you guys are going through these ideas so fast, and you're on to the next idea. And I'm still getting ready to completely formulate my thought. I have a lot of things to say about this, but the conversation has moved on. What would you say to someone like that?
It's in there. I address this directly because I've seen it with so many leaders. And so there's a section in my book where I talk about, 2 or 3 pages and very specific action steps around how to interject. So how do you interject when other people are more dominating in the conversation, are much more comfortable? And I think the key thing is be able to say, hey, I agree with what Bob said, and I like to add something. Or I even like raising your hand or telling the facilitator in advance of the meeting, say, hey, can you call on me 1 or 2 times? Setting yourself up where you get more comfortable interjecting and recognize that you have something to say. And so before the meeting, one thing I have leaders do is I said, and this is a really simple step to take that has incredible value for introverts. Spend 2 to 3 minutes before every meeting and think about what the agenda is about and prepare 2 or 3 talking points based on the agenda. So when that subject matter turns to that area, you're going to already have something that isn't in the background of your mind and you have a hard time bringing forward. It's in the forefront of your mind. And you're like, oh yeah, I thought about this. It's in front of me. Here's the idea I wrote down. And then all of a sudden you raise your hand more quickly and you're like, okay, I have something I want to share. So that prep ahead of time of a meeting primes yourself so that you're more readily available to share information and lean into the conversation and be quicker out of the gate to get your voice heard. Because that's the thing, when things are going fast, you got to like slow it down, but you got to raise your hand, you got to interject, and you got to say, okay, I have something I want to add here. And then all the eyes are going to turn to you and your mind's going to go blank. You're like, oh my God, what do I say now? And it's like in that moment, just pause and say, okay, here's what I need to share. And then use that opportunity to dive in.
I think that is incredibly valuable advice. One of the things I like to do related to that is coach people to imagine who's going to be in the room, whether it's a physical room or whether it's a Zoom or Teams room, and like really just stop and say, okay, Joe from IT is going to be there. Sally from finance is going to be there. What are they going to ask? What are they going to bring up so that you can think about how do you jump into that conversation quickly too.
And to add to that, introverts by nature compared to extroverts who by nature are verbally, they communicate out loud. Introverts communicate internally. So how do they prime themselves so they get their internal thoughts to be more on the surface so they're more readily available to be utilized in meetings? So that's the thing, because oftentimes a meeting goes by them so quickly and so fast that they don't have an opportunity to actually put themselves in a position to quickly share and to share something that is of value.
All right, Joel, thank you so very much for being my guest on Asking for a Friend. Tell us where people can find you.
So I have my website's garfinkleexecutivecoaching.com. There is over 300 articles of information and 20 specific articles related to executive presence. And again, my book, you can get it on Amazon. It was a 2022 leadership bestseller. And it's something that I think you'll get a lot out of. If you want to step more into your power, convey more confidence, and lead with conviction, this executive presence book will lay out the 9 competencies of executive presence. And in the book, I go over each specific competency and break it down so that whatever competency you choose, you can go to that section and use it as a resource that's valuable for you improving that specific competency.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Joel. And so I look forward to our next edition of Asking for a Friend.